Hello everyone, welcome to the English Literature Squad. So let's go to space for diving into the fascinating world of literature and history. Today we are taking a step back into the most of step back into the one of the most transformative events in the history of English literature, which turned Norman Conquest of 1066. So we are all lovers of English literature, and well, the Norman conquest was not just a making military take over. It completely reshaped the language, culture, and literary traditions of England. It marked the transition from Old English to a multilingual era dominated by Anglo Norman French, Latin, and eventually in Middle English. So let's explore how this conquest gave birth to some of the most fascinating literary works of the this medieval period in the beginning of Norman conquest. We'll start from here. So, like chronicles, romances, religious texts, and even epics and tales like the legends of King Arthur. It's a story about power, language, and creativity all rolled into one. That is what history of English literature. Now let's talk about claimants to the throne. So how it began. The death of Edward the Confessor in January 1066 without legitimate heir led to multiple claims to the English throne. And here, after that, Harold Godwinson, crowned king by the Wittington, the Council of Nobles on January 6, 1066, William Duke, it means William, Duke of Normandy, he claimed that uh, Edward had promised him the throne and that Harold had sworn an oath to support his claim. So after that, Harald Hardrada, king of Norway, also claimed the throne, believing he had a right through an argument with a previous king of England. See here, the Anglo-Norman period began with the Norman conquest of England in 1066. Here, the William Conqueror, Duke of Normandy, defeated King Harold II at the Battle of Hastings on 14,000 October 14,066. This victory marked end of Anglo-Saxon rule, and this is what the Anglo-Saxon rule and the beginning of Norman dominance in England. So after that, William's coronation as a king of England on Christmas Day in the year 1066 solidified his control. So here you can see the pictures of Edgar Atheling, the confessors of great nephew Edward, the confessors of great nephew. He was too young to be considered a strong enough claimant, and Harold Godwinson, William Normandy, and Harald Ardadra. He is king of Norway, and William Normandy, Duke of Edward the Confessor of cousin and Duke of Normandy. So he invaded the England and won the throne at the Battle of Hastings. He is also known as the William the Conqueror. So now step into the main content. Anglo-Norman period, 1066 to 1340. This is what the crisis in England. King Edward at the Confessor, 1042 1066, and why the Norman invasion happened. The key events of the Norman conquest, consequences of the Norman conquest. Here, I've discussed with you one by one. The Norman conquest of England in the year 1066 was a pivotal event in European history and that reshaped England's political, social, and especially in a linguistic landscape. And it was drawn by a succession crisis and power struggle over the English throne. So now let's see the historical background one by one. Here, the succession crisis in England, King Edward the Confessor is 1042 to 1066. He ruled England but died childless in January 1066. So multiple contenders claimed the English throne. Harold Godwinson, also known as Earl of Wessex, was chosen as king by the English nobility and crowned as a King Harold II. And after that, William, Duke of Normandy, claimed that Edward had promised him the throne that Harold had sworn on the oath to support him. After that, Harald Ardadra, king of Norway, also laid claim, arguing that a past agreement between Vikings rulers gave him the right. So, after this, why the Norman invasion happened? So, William of Normandy, later William the Conqueror, felt betrayed when Harold Godwinson took the throne. William secured the papal support and arguing that Harold was illegitimate ruler. He assembled a fleet and an army with support from across France and launched an invasion. The key elements of the Norman conquest here: Battle of Stamford Bridge in September 25, 1066. Harold Godwinson defeated the Norwegian king Harald Ardadra, ending the Viking threat. So, in that time, there was a major event that is what called Battle of Hastings, October 14, 1066. William's forces defeated and killed Harold II, securing Norman rule over England. This is what very very important. William coronation December 25, 1066. William was crowned the King of England. And consequences of the Norman conquest. See, when federal system introduced, Norman lords replaced Anglo-Saxon nobles. So like they built castles because of their defensive structure, like the Tower of London were established. Language and culture changed. French became the language of the elite, influencing English. And in a Doomsday Book, it was written around 1086, a great survey of England's land and property. Here you can see the picture. So many of you don't know about this picture. Uh, so this is what called the picture, the basic tapestry. Here you can see the basic tapestry is an embroidered cloth and nearly around 70 meters long and about 50 centimeters 50 centimeters wide, and it depicts the events and leading up to the Norman conquest of England 1066 and culminates in the Battle of Hastings, where the William Conqueror defeated the King Harold of Second of England. And key features of the basic tapestry, this will portray about historical narrative, especially narrates the story in a sequential format, beginning with political intrigue between King Edward the Confessor and Godwinson and Duke William of Normandy, and it highlights Harold's oath to William, and it highlights the Norman invasion, the climatic battle of Hastings, and the tapestry is embroidered in colored wool threads on linen, and especially the caption on this embroidery written in Latin, and the borders are filled with decorative motifs like mythical creatures, scenes of daily life, offering, and it represents medieval culture. So it's around 11th century. And basic cathedral, so thought to have been made in England, given the Anglo-Saxon embroidery techniques. So symbolism and propaganda. The tapestry was not merely a historical record, but also piece of political propaganda by portraying William's claim to the English throne as a legitimate and Harold as an oath breaker. It justifies Norman rule. It celebrates William triumph while subtly enforcing the power of the Normans over England. So now let's see, covering daily life, social structure, feudalism, literature, the role of women, and the decline of Norman influence. See here one by one. Daily life and social structure in Anglo-Norman. period. The Anglo-Norman conquest introduced significant changes in everyday life, especially in governance, economy, and society. So here, the first point, social hierarchy. The feudal system introduced by William Conqueror divided society into six classes. The king owned all land and granted it to his most loyal followers. Next, barons and bishops, the wealthiest lords and church leaders, controlled large estates in return for military service, and knights provided military service in return for lands. Freemen, farmers, and merchants who were not bound to a lord, and serfs, villains, the lowest class, tied to the land and unable to live without permission. So the church was incredibly powerful and influenced every aspect of life from birth to death. And the second point, feudalism and the economy. The feudal system ensured that land, power, lords gave land to knights who protected peasants who worked the land in exchange for food and shelter. Uh, Manorial system. The economy was centered around manors, self-sufficient villages with farmland, mills, and churches. And they introduced taxation. We can see this in a Domesday Book in a thousand. It was written around 1086. Was created to assess land value and taxation. And trade is also one of the important in England, and food and clothing. Nobility, they ate meat, pork, fish, white bread, and imported wine, whole wool, silk. So, like, and peasants ate rye bread, potash, vegetables like cheese, or simple wool, tunics, and leather shoes. And law and order, trial by combat or uh, ordeal, like firewater, was used to determine in guilt, and castles controlled rebellions with strongholds like the Tower of London. Henry II, around is span between 1154 to 1189. He introduced legal reforms, creating common law and trial by jury. Now let's see one by one the role of women in Anglo-Norman England: noble women, peasant women, influential women. The first one, the role of women in Anglo-Norman England. When women's status depended on social class, but they had more rights than in later medieval England. The first one, noble women. Marriage was arranged for alliances. Women brought dowries like land, money, goods. Some women ruled estates when their husbands were at war. Example, Eleanor of Aquitaine. Noble women engaged in needlework, reading, and religious duties. Peasant women worked in field, cooked, and took care of children. Had no legal independence. Husbands controlled property and wages. Uh, After that, influential women, uh, Eleanor of Aquitaine, span between 1122 to 1204, wife of Henry II, powerful queen who influenced country culture and literature, Matilda. So, this is what fought for her right to rule during the anarchy, 1135 to 1153. This is what role of women in England. This is what the pictures just I am showing to understand the concept. So now let's see literature and language in the Anglo-Norman period. This is what very important, like background how we understand Anglo-Norman literature, the rise of Anglo-Norman literature, key genres and themes in literature like chronicles, stories, romances, theoric literature, religious and didactic text, legal and administrative text. The transition to Middle English means Old English to Middle English, like literature and jewelry. The Anglo-Norman period transformed English literature and language, shaping Middle English. So the first one point is a language shift. Norman French became the language of government, law, and aristocracy. Latin was used in the church and scholarly writings. English survived among commoners but absorbed thousands of French words, example court, justice, soldier, beef, fork, like this. And Anglo-Norman literature about knights, honor, and courtly love became popular. Example, in this Anglo-Norman period, the Song of Roland, a French epic about war and loyalty. And Mary French wrote romantic fables, lies, about love and adventure. In this particular religious text, Latin and French Bible stories are influenced religious devotion, legal and historical works. Doomsday Book, written around 1086, recorded England's land and wealth, and Vasis Roman de Brut, written around 1155, a history of England based on legends, and Anglo-Norman literature, uh, 1066 to 1204, was a defining era in the history of English literature, marked by the profound influence of the Norman conquest on language, culture, and literary traditions, especially. During this period, literature flourished in Anglo Norman, a dialect of Old French used by ruling elite in England, it means upper class. Anglo Norman literature played a crucial role in shaping medieval uh, English literary culture and bridging the gap between Old English and Middle English traditions. The rise of Anglo-Norman literature. With the Norman conquest in England in 1066, uh, linguistics and literary landscape of England underwent a radical transformation. The ruling classes spoke Anglo-Norman, while Latin remained the dominant language of scholarship and administrations. As a result, much of the literature produced in the immediate post-conquest period was written either Latin or Anglo-Norman rather than Old English. And Anglo-Norman became the primary literary language for a wide range of texts, including historical chronicles and text and legal documents. It was used by the aristocracy and clergy, reflecting the culture dominance of the Normans in England. Key genres and themes. See one by one. So Anglo-Norman literature encompassed variety of genres, each serving different cultural and social purposes. Chronicles and histories. One of the most significant contributions of Anglo-Norman literature was the development of historical writing. And chronicles such as Geoffrey Gaymer and Weiss wrote historical narratives that blended fact with legends. And Weiss's Roman de Brut, written around 1155, was a vernacular verse chronicle of Britain's legendary history, based on Geoffrey of Monmouth's Historia Regum Britanniae. It helped popularize the legend of King Arthur in French and later in English literature. Romances and chivalric literature. Anglo-Norman literature played a central role in the emergence of the romance genre, which celebrated themes of knightly valor and courtly love and adventure. Works such as Tristan et Isolde and Le Roman de Ro exemplified the chivalric ideals that became a defining feature of medieval and European literature is also one of the important key element around Norman conquest time, religious and didactic text. So texts were religious in nature, reflecting the period's deep Christian piety. And ideographies, which we already studied in Old English period. Ideographies are or saints' lives, such as La Vie de Saint Alexis and La Vie de Sainte Marguerite were widely read, both clerics and lay audience. So after this, the Anglo-Norman reflect the imposition of normal law and England. These texts played a crucial role in shaping English traditions. The transition to Middle English by the late 12th and 13th centuries, Anglo-Norman literature began to wane as a Middle English emerged as a literary language, while Anglo-Norman remained in use among the aristocracy and legal context for some time. The increasing prominence of English in literature, exemplified by works like the Ormulum and Layman's Brut, signaled a linguistic shift. So after that, Anglo-Norman literature laid the foundation for later medieval English literary developments and had a lasting effect of the evolution of English vocabulary and literary forms. So this period was a transformative era for literature, as well as it introduced new genres, and themes and linguistic influence to England. The dominance of Anglo-Norman, as a language, literary language during this period helps shapes the course of English literature, enriching its narrative traditions and broadening its cultural origins through chronicles and romances, religious texts, legal writing. So, literature left enduring legacy, influenced the development of Middle English and beyond. And in this literature and chivalry, so this period saw the rise of courtly romances like chivalric literature, replacing the heroic poetry and alliterative verses of the Anglo-Saxon period. So after this, song of works such as the Song of Roland and the Romance of the Rose were popular during of this time. Now see, decline of Norman influence. It means the king, political developments, King John and the Magna Carta, the rise of the English language, the transition to Middle English. Here, the decline of Norman influence from around 1200 to 1340. By 1340, Anglo-Norman elite had fully merged with the English population, and distinct Norman identity faded. So here the 4.1 King John and the Magna Carta around 1215. It means exactly on 1215. So here King John lost Normandy to France in 1204. So barons rebelled, forcing him to sign the Magna Carta around 1215, limiting royal power. So the rise of the English language by the 1300s, English was replacing Norman French in a government and law. In 1348, Black Death weakened French-speaking elites, accelerating the use of English. The transition to Middle English in 1362, English became the official language of Parliament. So here we see political developments. Normans established control overall of England and parts of Wales, and their influence extended parts of Scotland and Ireland. The period also saw the integration of Viking settlers with Frankish inhabitants, leading to a more stable and governed region. So here, if we observe the key figures of and events, Henry II, he lived around 1154 to 1189. It means Henry II's reign saw the expansion of English territories in France and the establishment of legal reforms. They laid foundation for the English common law system. So after that, Eleanor of Aquitaine, Henry II's marriage to Eleanor of Aquitaine brought significant French territories under English control and influenced the cultural and literary life of the court. So in 1215, Magna Carta was issued. King John's signing of the Magna Carta in 1215 was a significant event in the development of constitutional governance in England. By the late and the early 12th century, 12th century by the late 12th century and the early 13th centuries, Anglo-Norman literature began to wane as a Middle English emerged as a literary language, while Anglo-Norman uh, remained in use among the aristocracy and in a legal context for some time. So, increasing the prominence of English literature, exemplified by works like the Omilum and Layman's Brut, signaled a linguistic shift. So, afterwards, Anglo-Norman literature laid the foundation for later medieval English literary development, and it had a lasting impact on the evolution of English vocabulary and literary form. So here we can see the legacy of the Anglo-Norman period, how it changes from Anglo-Norman to Middle English period. So cultural and linguistic changes. The Anglo-Norman period went 1066 to 66 to 1340. So this is what shaped England's political and linguistical and cultural identity. If we observe overall this period, like key contribution of this complete period, so we can see federal system, legal reforms, linguistic change, literature and chivalry, so architecture built. So these five are very very important key contributions. And after that, by 1340 England had changed dramatically, and the French speaking elite were now English. Feudalism was weakening, leading new governance. The stage was set for 100 years what 100 years war, 1337 to 1453, between England and France. So by observing all these points, so literature and language evaluation. So during this period, English language began to evolve, incorporating more Norman, French vocabulary and grammar also. And Middle English literature emerged with work such as the Canterbury Tales, which was written by Geoffrey Chaucer, reflecting the linguistic and cultural changes of that time. And the Anglo-Norman period was a time of significant cultural, linguistics, and political transformation in England. And it was brought about profound changes that shaped development of English language, literature, and governance too. And if we observe in key contribution, cultural and linguistics change, it means the people introduced thousands of French words into English, like Norman French, which became the language of the court and administration and the aristocracy. Latin was used by the educated clergy, and while English remained the language of the common people. So this trilingual environment led to the incorporation of many Norman French words into the English language, significantly influencing its vocabulary and literary expression. And literary. So thank you, one and all. Kindly do subscribe English Literature Squad. Thank you.